right? And what we have to realize is that we're fighting against a tide that favors complacency, comfort, and safety. And Dr. King warned us about that. He said, I'm not concerned so much about the Ku Klux Klanners or the White Citizens Council. I'm worried about the silence of the good people, right? And there's so many people in this room who qualify as good people, but the reality is being a good person is not good enough when you look at everything that we're up against and the impacts not only to communities of color, but the viability of our entire state, right? All these Fortune 500 companies that we enjoy that will pack up and leave this state when they realize that they don't have a strong supply of workers as they're used to, and highly educated people. Why? Because of what's happening in our public education system. Because we haven't set up mentor programs. We haven't poured into the next generation, many of whom look like the Black and brown and Native women in this room, right? So we have to ask ourselves, are we the good people? Are we silent? Are we playing too much by the rules? And what harm are we causing as a result of that? And am I really showing solidarity if that's what I say that I believe?
And we both concluded that Paul Wellstone is the most recognized, and that Senator Wellstone really talked about something incredibly important and defined it very, very quickly as he ran for office. And he talked about we all do better when we all do better. And it's recognized really nationally, and it's interesting about this because I think it resonates with all communities. When we ask our communities about what that means and the essence of we all do better when we all do better, yeah, it resonates with all of us. And so the conversation for us was then, if we recognize it, if we know the meaning of it, do we think that that actually became a reality? That Paul Wellstone, with all the strength and all of the recognition, did his presentation of we all do better when we all do better, actually had the impact that he wanted to infuse into politics. Are the politics of Minnesota reflecting that today? And our conclusion is that it really hasn't. That this was presented to Minnesota 36 years ago. So long before I got here, long before Nekima got here. And we repeat it all the time. It's a chant in every political campaign because we know the importance of it. We know the essence of it. But yet, working on making sure that we make it real and that we put in place policies that actually put this into practice is something that Minnesota has not been able to do. And so we reflected about why is that? Why is that, although we recognize that we have been talking about for 36 years, we recognize the value, we understand it, why is that we cannot move into implementing and putting a practical plan to make that a reality?
And I think that part of why we don't have a practical plan is because we don't really have the political will to do what's necessary. Most people are not willing to give up their own comfort and their own safety and their own security to fight for those who cannot repay you, but who need your voice, who need your leadership, who need your gifts and talents to stand with them and to empower them to be able to speak for themselves. I don't know how many people are out there within our communities who have a voice, because we always say we want to give a voice to the voiceless, and the people are like, I'm not voiceless. You just won't get out the way and let me come speak my truth. Because when I show up and I'm frustrated and I'm full of tension and I'm ready to unleash that, not with any physical weapons, but with the words that are coming out of my mouth and saying them in a way that's not palatable to you, then suddenly I'm a threat, right? And what happens when someone is a threat? Typically we exclude them, or as we've seen happening around the nation, we call 911 so that the police can come and exclude them. At that point, when they are a threat to the status quo, they're no longer seen as a human being. They're seen as a threat. And that becomes dangerous. But I wonder, well, what if affluent white women decided to become a threat. Because I know that some of these things catch people by surprise because they don't have any people of color in their social circles. For those who go to church, they don't have any people of color who go to their church, maybe one or two people. Maybe they don't have people of color who live in their neighborhoods or who go to their kids' schools, so maybe they're oblivious to what is going on. But there's enough reports that have been written, enough money that's been spent, enough issues that have been studied for every single person in Minnesota to know what's going on. And the question is, what will you do about it once you know? That's how we all do better.
And that solidarity then needs to go beyond the solidarity within the group to really be shared with each and every one of the other groups, because it is not until then that we will be able to advance women's power. What we want is to build the strength of the voices in our communities, because that power and that opportunity has been taken away from us far too long, especially for Native people and for African Americans, but really for immigrants today. Without those stories, without those perspectives, without that strength, we cannot think about solidarity, and we cannot really conclude that we have this shared power and this progressive solidarity. So we want to move into really the invitation to solidarity versus the invitation to assimilation. This solidarity that I am describing many times will require that you need to step aside and that you need to share that moment and that opportunity for others to come in. And the only way we can change those numbers, we can bring more women to these positions and we can elect more women, is if we build a solidarity around women and we understand how do we bring those voices, how do we get these women elected, how do we move beyond thinking, well, she's not electable. I think she's too radical. So she doesn't have this and this and the other. So then these individuals never make it. These women will never make it to these positions of power. In every place, I am talking about politics because politics is what I do, but that happens in private sector, it happens in every sector, where we always see the deficiencies and what we don't have in order to make it versus what we do have and we can learn and build in order to have these voices at the table.
And let me just add, Patricia, after Donald Trump's election, nobody should say anybody is not electable. I'm sorry. Come on now. That should not even come out of anybody's mouth at this point in time. So in order for the progressive movement to remain relevant, it must include an equity and inclusion framework. So what does an equity and inclusion framework look like, right? It looks like making decisions that include the voices and the perspectives of people of color. It doesn't mean white people making decisions and then inviting people of color to the table to kind of fit into the box that's been constructed, right? And if you get out of place, if you act in a manner that people find unpalatable or that makes them uncomfortable, you're almost certain to not be invited back to that table. And the reality is that you really weren't welcome there in the first place. Right. So an equity and inclusion framework means that you're going to be more authentic about deciding who's even at the table and why are they there. Why is deference automatically given in many circumstances to middle and upper middle class white people as automatically being qualified to sit at certain tables, to be a spokesperson, to make decisions? I spent a lot of time in philanthropy during my time as a law professor, sitting on various boards. And I would go to those meetings with very nice, well-meaning people, many of whom were very wealthy, own companies. I mean, the list goes on, high-ranking positions. But the reality is that many of those folks were not qualified to determine how resources should be allocated within communities of color. But they had all the power. And sitting at those tables as a person of color who grew up in poverty, my voice would often be in the minority, trying to tell them that a new paradigm was in order, saying we need to evaluate what is the reason why we're giving out these grants. What problems are we actually trying to solve? Are we trying to solve a problem, or are we doing what we've always done? Which means we're going to get what we've always got, which, as Einstein said, is the definition of insanity, right? So it gets to a point where people have to be willing to get uncomfortable and to be uncomfortable and to have people at the table who are going to tell it like it is. Because iron sharpens iron, right? If you bring your life experience to the table and I'm validating you and affirming you, and I bring my life experience to the table and you're validating me and affirming me, that means that there's room for both of us at the table. That there's a give and take, an exchange of information, which means that we're more than likely going to get the best ideas that come forward, right? Whether it's at the philanthropic tables, or in the world of politics, or in corporate America, or in academia, or wherever we decide to go, that needs to be the way that we're thinking, that we have to make room at the table, and that means some of you have to be willing to give up your seats. And not feel that you've lost anything by giving up your seats, but knowing you inherited things that you didn't deserve. Because of how this country has been structured, and because of the land and the culture and the wealth that has been stripped away from indigenous people and people of color, and we're all sitting on stolen land to this day. The white men who are in power, whether it's in Congress or our legislature or pretty much whatever system of government that we look at, they're not going to tell us these things, right? We're not going to get their permission to go in and bust up the status quo, right? Like Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. So when will the demand be made? What are we going to do? We can't just keep sitting around these tables talking and having these conversations. We have to actually do something more. We have to listen to people. We have to believe black women, right? And not ignore their voices and their perspectives. And we have to withdraw from white saviorism, which happens all too often when we do have a white woman who steps forward or a white man who steps forward. Suddenly other white people are seeing them as a champion of equity when they haven't walked the walk. They might be talking the talk, they might mean it, but that doesn't mean they're the best representative to speak truth to power, right? So we have to realize that white supremacy means that people will yield to white saviorism, and they may put that above the voices of people who are actually enduring the oppression and the racism and the discrimination. So you had a woman by the name of Sojourner Truth who was born into slavery, and she could not read or write. And actually one of her quotes said, why do I need to read letters when I can read men? You know, I mean, she told it like it was. She's like, women, stop begging for your rights and go take them. You know, this woman, again, she had been born into slavery, and she went and was part of the women's suffrage movement, and she gave a famous speech called Ain't I a Woman? Because she talked about the fact that I can't, you know, you all are asking for the right to vote, you're pushing for the right to vote, you're talking about the impacts that you've experienced as white women, which I can relate to as a woman, but how about your experience coupled with the fact that I've been through slavery, coupled with the fact that my children have been sold off and I can't get them back, coupled with the fact that I've been whipped and beaten and not compensated for my labor, that I don't know where I'm going to end up next, that I've been denied an education, that I've been denied the right to earn a living because of the color of my skin. And ain't I a woman? So she said this speech to white women saying, wake up, realize that you are going through, but I'm going through 10 times as much because of the color of my skin and my gender. So get involved in both fights. We don't have to decide, right? That's what intersectionality means, that we're looking at all the pieces of the puzzle and figuring out how do we connect to all the pieces of the puzzle, not just our one little safe piece, right? And society has taught us to just focus on that one piece, but society is wrong.